New York City has always been the home of the United Nations headquarters, but questions are being raised over whether it should be relocated. The US refused to grant visas to the Palestinian delegation, including the Prime Minister Mahmoud Abbas, at a time when their voices need to be heard the most. So, what are the main challenges for the United Nations? Hello and welcome to Roundtable. I'm Enda Brady. Now, the United Nations General Assembly is meeting at a precarious time with world peace and security in jeopardy. Ongoing conflicts in Gaza, Ukraine and Sudan, as well as the deepening climate emergency, all need firm action. Can the UN deliver, and can its members step up?
These are the most important buildings in the world, for they are the center of man's hope for peace and a better life. This is the place where the nations of the world will work together to make that hope a reality.
Since 1952, members of the United Nations General Assembly have convened at this building. It's located in New York City, on special land outside the jurisdiction of the United States. However, for years there have been calls for the UN's HQ to be relocated, to be more cost-effective, but also to bring policymakers closer to the regions they work on. And it seems those calls have not gone unheard. Earlier this year, the United Nations announced its UN at 80 reforms, part of which will involve moving major agencies to the heart of Africa.
We have been investing in Nairobi, creating the conditions for Nairobi to receive services that are now in more expensive locations. And UNICEF will be transferring soon some of the functions to Nairobi, and UNFPA will be essentially moving to Nairobi.
Those behind the move say that the decision will establish the Kenyan capital as a major UN hub, alongside Geneva and Vienna, who already host multiple UN offices. It's hoped that it will also boost the local economy and African influence on the decision-making process. But some staff and member states have criticised proposed cuts and potential effects on operations. So, is it a good move? Will it help bring the world's meeting place into a rapidly evolving world? Or do the UN's problems go deeper than its concrete foundations?
Well, let's bring in our guests. In Canterbury in England, we're joined by Shahd Hammouri. Shahd is an international lawyer and an academic. In Brussels, we're joined by Donnacha O Beachain. He is Professor of Politics at Dublin City University. And in Berlin, we welcome the journalist Emmanuel Igunza. You're all very welcome to Roundtable. Donnacha, to you first. I saw a statement this week from the Elders, that gathering of former world leaders, who said, without bold change, the UN risks irrelevance and collapse at a moment when humanity most needs global cooperation. Are they exaggerating, or do they have a point?
Well, it's hard to remember a time when the world was more deeply divided and that there were unregulated conflicts occurring in so many parts of the globe, and the United Nations was unable, indeed perhaps unwilling, to intervene. But at the same time, you can over-exaggerate how new this dispensation is that we find ourselves. When the United Nations was established in 1945, it wasn't necessarily a high point for humanity. We were coming out of the Second World War and genocide, and we were entering the Cold War, where the world was divided rigidly into two blocks, and that paralyzed a lot of the good work potentially that the United Nations could have done for many years. So I tend to, be reticent in blaming the UN as an institution. The UN as an institution is only as good as the members that participate in it. And the UN is in very many respects a mirror of the world. So the world is messy, it's divided, it's not working well right now. We have a climate emergency, we have Gaza, we have Ukraine, and that's reflected in the United Nations. The United Nations was never meant to overcome those great power rivalries in a structural way. It was supposed to create a forum where people who would otherwise not engage were able to engage and engage in a relatively equal way, because, of course, every state, from the smallest of 10 or 11,000 to the United States and to China, participate and have one vote in the General Assembly. So it has its pluses and minuses. We are in a deep crisis globally. There's no getting around that. And that's obviously reflected in the United Nations.
Thanks, Donnacha. Shahd, to you. So for decades and decades, the UN has had its headquarters in New York City. There's a lot of talk at the moment about perhaps moving it away from New York, somewhere like Geneva or Norway or even Nairobi in Kenya. Do you think location is a problem here, that, you know, a lot of power and wealth and money concentrated in New York City? Do you think it would be a great symbol and statement to the rest of the world if they relocated somewhere?
Well, I think that location is only one part of the problem, as in, look at it today. As we speak, the Palestinian delegation is mostly incapable of making it to the US. I'm incapable of being in the US and trying to do my best to figure out what is happening there only via phone. And why? Because at the moment, the United Nations is headquartered in the number one state perpetrating international law, and that is the United States of America. If there is one state that has magnificently managed to breach that system, it is international law. It's the United States of America. However, I would say that the problem really is deeply within the system that was created in the post-World War II moment. It took the 5 winner states as in the veto states, and these states currently own, let's say, a big proportion of the military industry in this world. And it's quite nonsensical that we give the states with the most interest in the proliferation of war the hands on how it goes about. So I would say that perhaps there is currently no political will to move the UN General Assembly out of New York. However, what I would presume would happen is the fact that the money will push them out. The UN is currently going through a huge financial crisis, and this move can then be leveraged to change the core philosophy of the system and ask the question of what has been going wrong and how is it that we've been reading the main purpose of this institution, which is the maintenance of international peace and security, in a way that glorifies existing power relations and imperial relations and gives those with the interest to create more wars the upper hand. So it's perhaps a strategic opportunity that has been given through an unwanted outcome out of the tightening of the US on this budget, because they can no longer really hold it. So they are seriously looking into a relocation for these financial purposes.
Thanks, Shahd. Let's bring in Emmanuel. To you, how worried should we be then that Gaza is one of the stories of our times? We're witnessing a genocide on the Palestinian people, and yet visas have not been issued to the Palestinian delegates, many of whom wanted to be in New York and can't go because the United States and presumably Israel have said they don't want them there.
I mean, that's one of the biggest problems that we can see with how the UN is structured, that, some of these problems, one of the biggest crises, people have been calling it a genocide that is happening in Gaza is happening, but we're talking constantly, the world is talking about the Palestinians and Israelis and all the other stakeholders coming together and having a conversation around the table to discuss this conflict, to bring an end to the suffering of the people in Gaza. But even the simplest of issues, issuing a visa to the delegation to get into the United States to have these discussions is a big problem. And therefore it goes without saying that without any meaningful reforms to how the world powers who dominate the United Nations, perhaps the strongest organ of the United Nations, the United Nations Security Council, the reforms that have been called for, without making really great changes, reforms to that structural system, there would not be much change, even if the UN moves to a place like Kenya.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Emmanuel. Well, let's go to Kenya. Joining us now from Nairobi, the capital of Kenya, we have Ababu Namwamba. He's a Kenyan politician and diplomat. Ababu, you're very welcome to Roundtable. just what Emmanuel was saying there, you know, that the UN can move anywhere, but the issues will follow it around. Are you concerned that Palestinian delegates have not been given visas this week to the United States?
Thank you. Thank you very much for having me. And it is very important, of course, to acknowledge that we're having this conversation in the context of the UN 80 reform initiative. So this is a very good moment to assess how far the UN has come and how to sort of drive this institution to a point where it is fit for purpose and remains relevant to the challenges that continue to confront humanity. We also need to remind ourselves that peace and security were at the core of the founding philosophy or dreams of the United Nations. And therefore, if that vision, if that dream is not coming to the fore, then certainly we would have reason to question whether the institution is living up to its founding philosophy, its founding dream. And talking of peace and security, you want to imagine that you cannot have a world that is at peace and secure with itself if you have restrictions and limitations on any segment of humanity engaging in conversations intended to secure that vision of the United Nations. And so, yeah, therefore, it is a concern. The issue raised is certainly an issue of concern.
Thank you, Ababu. Shahd, to you, this is a very significant week in terms of recognising Palestinian statehood. Can I just ask you, as a Palestinian woman, how you feel seeing the United Kingdom, France, Canada and Australia all come to the United Nations this week and recognise the state of Palestine?
Well, I wouldn't say I'm delighted. I would say that this, if anything, these states are seeking to not answer the question that they should have answered at the moment. What these states should have been doing at the moment is to impose sanctions on the state of Israel by all means available, is to use their leverage to stop the ongoing genocide in Gaza. And instead, what they do is that they give us a recognition of a state. Of course, that is one step forward. And a good thing about it is that it signals a fracture in what we can call the imperial core of this world between the EU and the US. It demonstrates that they do not fall on the same lines with their foreign policy and that there is interior tension that could be leveraged to our end. However, it also means that they would rather put this forward, this folder, especially with the New York conference and with the resolution that came about, and to forget the basic premises of international law, such as no other state gets to decide who rules the Palestinian people, no other state gets to decide the curriculum of the Palestinian people or their future, and self-determination is not open for negotiation. That's just a plain breach of basic international law. And what is most worrying in this context is that the Palestinian Authority is using this moment so as to prioritize its own agenda. Almost what we is estimated to be around 200,000 people have been killed in Gaza, and those people haven't their lives, their death has to be given a meaning. And that meaning definitely is not in reconsolidating the powers of a corrupt regime. However, we do have another opportunity in the General Assembly this week that is, I believe, more momentous to the Palestinian people, which is calling for a uniting for peace resolution. If that resolution happens, which I believe has been set back by the UN Security Council and some procedural issues that are not in our favor, if we are to see that happen, what we hope is that this will be an opportunity for states to actually genuinely take their obligations forward. And that is by imposing sanctions, by sending protective presence to Palestine, and by also ensuring that there's an accountability mechanism going forward. The Palestinian civil society has been asking for this quite strongly, but sadly enough, again, with the limitation of their presence in New York this week, we will have a very limited capacity to ensure that this messaging goes to state. And the reality is, if states don't show any serious engagement with especially these folders, rather than the folder of statehood, what we will find is further breaking of international law and its very fabric. It becoming a space of ridicule and absurdity if this keeps on happening.
Thanks, Shahd. Emmanuel, to you, does Africa get enough of a say when it comes to the General Assembly? As Donnacha pointed out, the Big Five on the Permanent Security Council, this was a world that was created in 1945 and an organisation that came out of the embers of World War II. Do you think it needs to change to reflect Africa's growing prominence?
As you say, the world has been frozen after the World War II, and a bigger part of the continent, the African continent, representing more than 1.5 billion people, is not represented at all. The voices are not heard. I have covered the African Union, where I lived in Ethiopia for several years, and constantly in every summit that the African leaders met, this is one of the things that they've been calling for, that they want the African continent to be represented among the much more strongly within the United Nations Security Council. If you look at just the crises that the continent is facing, the conflicts in places like Sudan, which has been going on for now almost 3 years, and you look at the Democratic Republic of Congo, another conflict that has raged on. And part of why these conflicts have continued to go on without any sense of coming to an end is because also of the structural problems within the United Security Council, that at many points when most important issues are being discussed, those players who could help in bringing peace to these conflicts are not at the table. They're not represented within the United Nations Security Council. So as the leaders meet in New York again, the General Assembly, it's another time to actually look critically on whether the United Nations is fit for purpose. And the direct answer is it's not. And this has changed.
Thank you, Emmanuel. Ababu, to you, just on that point, what Emmanuel said, is it fit for purpose? What would you like to see change with the UN then to bring it into the modern world?
No, first of all, I believe there is general consensus that the UN certainly needs to be democratized, to be more representative of the demographic and other realities of the world we live in today. And so you certainly want to see a stronger presence and influence of Africa. You want to see a UN General Assembly that goes beyond the risk of being more than just a talk shop. You want to see the Security Council that is more reflective of what I have called the demographic realities of the world. And so, yes, representation of Africa within the UN Security Council and greater leverage of the UN General Assembly so that beyond merely coming together to talk, you have a lot more bite.
Donnacha, to you, I saw an incredible quote this week attributed to a man who was the second Secretary General back in the day, a Norwegian, Dag Hammarskjöld, and he said the UN was created not to lead mankind to heaven, but to save humanity from hell. He couldn't have put it better.
Indeed, and he was a tragic figure, of course, died while trying to solve conflict in Africa in an airplane crash. To this day, there's always theories about what happened to him, but he captured the paradox of the UN very well, that it wasn't about creating heaven. It's not a utopia, as I've said earlier. It's about preventing the worst impulses of humankind from expressing themselves globally. And, you know, the hells we face today in 2025 are growing ones, unfortunately. They're not receding. The conflicts that we've mentioned, the climate emergency. And if the UN is to be more than a talking shop, if it's to be a force for good, it is going to have to resurrect that vision that people like Dag Hammarskjöld articulated of a different kind of world, but one that's not perfect, as I said, but one in which people don't put their own countries necessarily first. It requires courage, it requires compromise, it requires a willingness to engage with others. We haven't seen it, unfortunately, thus far. The world, in fact, is moving towards an authoritarian world. Only about 12.5% of the population live in a liberal democracy like Ireland, where I live. That means that the vast majority of people in the world don't get to choose their leaders. And that's as I said, going to be reflected in all types of engagements, and it's going to make conflict much more likely in the world. So we unlike the Cold War in many respects, which was not a great era, but was somewhat stable, certainly in Europe with the Iron Curtain, we live in a very unpredictable and fluid world now. And as I said, the dangers are only ever greater.
Thanks, Donnacha. Shahd, to you. So we spoke earlier on about Palestinians being denied visas to go to the United States. Clearly, you would have liked to have travelled. I just want you to say now to us and to any politicians and leaders watching Roundtable, what would you say in front of the UN General Assembly about Gaza and the ongoing genocide of your people?
That's a very big question. Well, what I would say is that this is a moment where the public consciousness of the world is really rising. And the idea that international peace and security is premised on upholding the rule of those most powerful is indeed a ridiculous one. And the case of Gaza stands as a case of extremity to show power relations bear. It shows us not that there's just a crisis in relation to how the world runs its militarization and how we inflate the markets into a manner whereby they are just very happy that a genocide is happening, but rather that there's a problem everywhere. There's a problem in Sudan, there's a problem in the Congo, and this is a world system that the majority rejects, and we cannot let this remain the way it is. Indeed, we are looking at a moment of complete destruction, and we should take this we should take this as a moment of rebuilding, and we should start to put forward a new project of how we imagine things. Palestine is at the forefront of this because it is something that unifies. It is so extreme that states stand next to each other. What we see now is a rise in state coalitions. So we are looking at the Bogota group, we are looking at CARICOM, we are looking at BRICS, we are looking at new coalitions and new states that are willing to speak up. However, when they're put in the room to speak about Palestine, it's not just about Palestine. It's about how is it that we will create new economic systems that evade the coercion of economically advanced states. How is it that we realize that actually most of the productive value has been taken out of the West, and the only thing that the West now has is weapons, and that's the only thing they can scare us with? But in reality, if we stand together, we have a much stronger voice. I think Palestine has given us this language, and indeed building on a resolution that calls for a direct end to the genocide by putting the UN system in confrontation with Israel. And by that, I mean sending protective presence and protective powers into Gaza at the moment. Of course, Israel will refuse them, but that means that Israel will outright refuse the judgment of the rest of the world again. And it will give the Palestinians further voice. It will give them further agency. We are at a moment where atrocity has been completely, absolutely normalized, and people are desensitized to it. The only way forward is for states to go on the ground. And this is the only option that we have at the moment. We've also asked states. Sorry.
Thank you. I just want to get to Emmanuel and then Ababu before we wrap up this roundtable. Emmanuel, to you, given all of the challenges in the world right now, this is a huge week for the United Nations, and it is imperative that leaders from all countries step up and deliver.
Yes, indeed, and I couldn't put it much better. It's time for the leaders to actually speak boldly and to address the conflicts of our time, the biggest challenges of our time. It's time to call out the issues that are happening in Gaza, the genocide that is happening in Gaza. take much tougher actions against Israel about what is happening, take much more bolder steps in terms of addressing the issues that are affecting the African continent, which is struggling, really paying the price for the climate emergency, take proper steps in addressing the conflicts, some of which are perpetrated by the West in places like the Democratic Republic of Congo, where we see Western powers influencing what is happening in the conflict, same as in Sudan. So it's a week where leaders must step up really and not just talk about symbolic gestures like moving the headquarters of the United Nations, but actually to talk about proper reforms that will address the challenges of our time.
Thanks, Emmanuel. Donnacha, we started this roundtable by saying that an organisation is only as strong as its membership. We really need the UN leaders to step up this week, don't we?
We do. The world is in crisis. We've already talked about the genocide in Gaza. We didn't get around really to talking about the largest conflagration in Europe since World War II, and that, of course, is Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine. The UN General Assembly has passed 6 resolutions calling for Russia to withdraw from Ukraine, and it hasn't been able to enforce that. And Gaza and Ukraine are fundamental tests of the UN Charter and its membership's commitment to it. If the UN fails to push back Russia and Ukraine, to stop the Israeli genocide in Gaza and the annexation, of course, of territories in the West Bank, then the US is failing. It's failing not only those countries, those peoples, but it's failing the world. And it's a far cry from the optimism that led to the foundation of the United Nations 80 years ago.
Donnacha, thank you so much, and to Shahd, Emmanuel and Ababu as well. Remember, you can see more discussion and debate on our YouTube channel. Just search for Roundtable TRT World. But for now, from me, Enda Brady, and all the team here, goodbye and thank you for watching.